Real warm welcome. I'm Lisa Witter. I'm talking to you on Zoom from Berlin, Germany, where I live, and I'm the co-founder and executive chairman of Apolitical. Apolitical, for those of you who don't know us, we're a global peer-to-peer learning platform for government, and this is our happy place, bringing people from all over the world together to share best practice and what's going on. We have a special series around COVID about how to support folks in government right now with the resources and skills and connections they need. And you'll be hearing during this talk today how relevant open government is to COVID-19. I'll be popping in the Zoom chat a survey that we did of public servants from around the world about what you need, so we could be supporting you as much as possible. Today, we're joined from public servants and folks from civil society. OGP has multi-sectors involved, but many of you from Apolitical are public servants from more than 50 countries, from Uzbekistan to Peru, Nigeria, Tunisia, the Maldives, Brazil, Nepal. This is Apolitical in action. How can we learn from one another? We're here today with Helen Clarke, Sanjay Pradhan, Robin Hoodis, Cesar Gazo-Hook, and Yao Young Lee. And we're going to be talking about exactly this COVID-19 through the open government frame. I want to make sure that I state that we are taping this, and so we'll be able to send out to folks if you want to share it with teams. You don't have to take copious notes if you want to share it, and we'll be sending links out afterwards. Also, the views expressed by these great people from OGP and from different governments are their own. Apolitical is a neutral platform where we bring people together. So want to let you know that this is their opinion, and it's widely shared by lots of folks. Also today, our webinar is available in English, French, Spanish, and Korean. Super exciting to be in multiple languages. It's the first time that we've used this technology. So if it's bumpy, please feel free to put questions in the chat box, and we will do everything we can to be supportive of as much inclusion as we go. For those of you using mobile or computer app, there's a couple of extra steps that every participant has to follow. This includes participants who wish to listen to the event in English. I'll go through them now. So one, if you're on a web browser, please click the interpretation button in the black bar at the bottom of your screen and select the language you'd like to hear. Then you'll get a little flag icon. If you're using the mobile app, please tap the more icon, which looks like 3 dots, and then tap language interpretation. Then select the language you like to hear throughout. You will not have to change the language at any point. So again, if you have any troubles with the language, please do just let us know in the chat and we will be there to help you. We're 3 minutes in. I want to welcome any folks who have just joined. We're up to 280 participants. Please do introduce yourself in the chat, your name, where you're from, the organization and the country. And if you have one word, describe what open government is. So I'm going to start with some speaker bios. Many of these folks you may know. I'll give brief bios and then we'll pop into the chat more of the bios. So the first is one of my big heroes. It's such an honor to be with Helen Clarke, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand and UNDP administrator. And she's an OGP, Open Government Partnership Ambassador. It goes without saying that she's a respected global leader on sustainable development, gender equality, and international cooperation. She served 3 successive terms as Prime Minister of New Zealand between 1999 and 2008. She's going to be speaking from a New Zealand perspective, but also has great global perspective from her international cooperation work. Sanjay, if you could wave who you are. Sanjay Pradhan is the Chief Executive Officer of the Open Government Partnership. He supports countries and local governments and thousands of civil society organizations working to make government more open, participatory, and less corrupt. Some of this language came up, Sanjay, as people were introducing themselves, describing what an open government is. Next, we have in Berlin, Robin Hoodis. Robin, could you give a wave to folks? She's the governance director of the B Team, a really interesting organization working with businesses to be great stakeholders in our societies. In this role, she engages both companies in efforts to prevent corruption and improve corporate governance, and contribute to responsible tax practice and protect civic freedoms. She's very involved in OGP, and she'll be talking to you about her role there and how she bridges these worlds in her work. Next, the last two speakers are folks from government, which is the core of our work at Apolitical. Cesar Gazo-Huck. Cesar, could you give a wave? He's the Undersecretary of Open Government and Digital Nation at the Chief of Cabinet. Pardon? Oh, someone's not on mute. If you are not on mute, could you go ahead and put yourself on mute? Fantastic. Chief of Cabinet Ministers for Argentina since December 2019. He leads the co-presidency of Argentina in the OGP. So he's representing government, but very engaged in OGP. And then last, if you could wave, Ya-Yoon Lee, I see you right there, is the Deputy Minister of the Interior and Safety for the government of Korea. He supports the co-creation work with civil society and Korea's OGP activities and is the co-chairmanship of the partnership. So very diverse points of view from New Zealand to Korea to Argentina to a very, very global view. So great. So I've introduced the speakers. Now we want to hear from you. Gemma, I apologize. Those birds are mine. I am sure my children will be coming at any moment to take these beautiful budgies into another room. So just making it real here with some budgies in the background, Fritzy and Larry. Okay, so now we're going to move to some poll questions. So what you'll do is if you're watching on the screen, the poll questions will come up. If for some reason you don't see them, I will read them out and just pop your answers in the chat. So first poll is, what do you hope to learn from this workshop? A, why open government is important. B, how open government relates to the responses of COVID-19. C, what open government approaches have been used to tackle the pandemic. D, how to connect with open government reformers in my country, wherever your country is. E, what can my country do to remain open during COVID-19? So how do you balance all this? What can you do? Or something else? So go ahead and put it in the chat. Had a lot of folks join in the last couple minutes, up to 324 folks from Jamaica, Philippines, London, South Africa, Argentina, Edinburgh. My apolitical colleagues, when you see majority of people, let's look at those poll results. So 55% of you wants to know what open government approaches have been used to tackle the pandemic. So really practical knowledge right now, followed by how it relates, how governments are responding to COVID-19. Fantastic. Well, we've got that ready for you. Let's go to the next poll. Will pop up on the screen. Fantastic. So which open government issues do you think is crucial to respond to COVID-19? Delivering public services, anti-corruption, protecting civic spaces, digital governance, gender and inclusion, or something else? Anne says delivering public services. Sure, a lot of this depends on where you come from in government. If you're in service delivery or policy or strategic planning. Folks from Mexico and Germany just joined. And again, Helen or Daisy or who's ever on the poll, whenever you're ready, let's take a look. Okay, so lots of folks around delivering public services, nearly 60% of you, followed by anti-corruption and then digital governance. So that's a good nod for the speakers to figure out how to blend that into some of your conversations. Great. So let's get to the meat of this. Before we start, since we have so many on, make sure you have gallery view, if everyone could do that. If you could pop on your camera, let's just do a quick wave to everyone. Now that we've got 9 minutes in, we've got a lot of people. Let's just be human with one another before we get into the policy stuff. Fantastic. Thanks. We try to create community in everything we do here at Apolitical. So I'm going to give a little bit of framing and then turn it over to Sanjay. So all countries, all segments of society are coping with this unprecedented challenge we're living through. Today, we are going to focus on how open government can help in this monumental task. Sanjay, since a large number joining this digital forum, especially our audience, may not understand or have come across the term open government or OGP, perhaps in your introduction, you can talk a little bit about what open government is, how those listening deploy aspects of open government in their work and how OGP may be able to help them. And then we'll bridge to the other speakers. So hand it over to you, Sanjay, and I will mute my birds. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lisa. A very warm hello to everyone. So let me illustrate what is open government through concrete examples from ongoing COVID-19 responses, as well as past OGP reforms. First, a quick introduction on OGP. It is a partnership of 78 countries and a growing number of local governments, together representing more than 2 billion people, where reformers from national and local governments, such as many of you on this call, work with civil society organizations to commit to concrete actions that make governments more transparent, participatory, responsive to citizens. So let us examine how open government can help with COVID-19 response and recovery. First, open government can help curb contagion. In South Korea, Taiwan, and New Zealand, which recently declared it had won the battle against COVID-19, a key to early success was proactive and reliable disclosure and directives by government, which empowered citizens to take mitigating actions, saving lives. Across governments, a core imperative has to be for government to be trustworthy and honest, so citizens can take measured and responsible action. Open government can also help in emergency procurements of life-saving medical supplies, where corruption, price gouging, and counterfeit supplies can jeopardize lives. While New York desperately struggled to acquire ventilators to save lives, it paid a whopping $69 million through an opaque contract for 1,500 ventilators at triple the retail price. Tragically, none were even delivered. Open procedures can help. For example, in Ukraine, the government is required to disclose emergency contracts as open data, which civil society monitors and tracks price differentials for COVID-19 supplies. As governments move to the recovery phase, open practices can help ensure that massive stimulus packages are being used for the purposes intended. 3 concrete examples. First, open budgets can empower citizens to follow the money, building trust. For example, the US Recovery Act of 2009 disclosed its $800 billion budget in open source format for citizens. Second, open contracts in these stimulus packages can save money, reduce corruption, and spur economic activity. Going back to the Ukraine example, when it disclosed open contracts as open data, it simultaneously empowered citizens to report violations on these contracts. In 2 years, citizens reported 14,000 violations. It saved $1 billion. 82% of the private sector reported reduced corruption, and there was a 50% increase in businesses, including small and medium enterprises, bidding for public contracts. Third, transparency, engagement, and oversight in safety nets for the vulnerable or broader recovery projects can help ensure that aid and stimulus packages actually reach their intended beneficiaries. Italy did something very innovative. The government disclosed in an online searchable platform the details of 1 million EU-financed projects and simultaneously launched a massive awareness campaign for citizens, including high school students, to become on-the-ground citizen monitors of projects. In Kaduna, Nigeria, the government disclosed the geolocation of projects through a mobile app using which citizens upload feedback for corrective action by government. So for all of this, the restrictions on civic freedoms that have been imposed to curb contagion must be lifted so citizens can freely shape and oversee recovery efforts as integral partners of public officials. In South Korea, when candlelight protests in Gwanghwamun Square brought down a corrupt regime, the new government invited citizens back to the same square as partners to propose policies that respond their needs. So in closing, as scientists scramble to develop an antidote to COVID-19 to bolster individuals, openness can be the antidote to bolster society. It can usher a longer-term shift in governance that puts citizens at the heart of government in a post-pandemic era. Thank you, Lisa. Back over to you.
Fantastic, Sanjay. Thanks. If I could ask all the participants to go ahead and pop your one word or sentence takeaway from Sanjay's great overview and so many different examples you provided of things that are working and things to learn from, that would be fantastic. So now we're going to have some popcorning insights from different speakers that I introduced at the top of the call. As they're speaking, feel free to pop in questions or comments, and then we'll open it up to more engagement. So we want to get to all of you. So with that, I'd like to turn over to Robin. And the question, Robin, for you is, we know there are some worrying trends out there when it comes to democracy and civic rights, and that civil society organizations have been raising these for some time. Now that we're in this very unique and challenging moment, what are the particular risks to democracy due to the pandemic? Robin.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's so exciting to be in 350 different spaces around the planet and to have this chance to talk to you and to reach out both to the apolitical community and also to the OGP family out there. It's so important that government officials and civil society can connect. This is, in fact, one of the real benefits and advantages of the Open Government Partnership is a real space and place for co-creation. So it's wonderful to have this hour with all of you today. I just want to make some reflections. I'll try to weave in some great examples, but Sanjay already mentioned some fantastic cases, and we can talk about some of those more because I think they add specifics. I guess I'm here a little bit with a cautionary tale, but I'll try to give a message of hope at the end, because in civil society, we have to wake up optimistic every day. I think that it's fair to say that government's been given a huge boost, in a sense, from this pandemic. I think the world had a wake-up call how much we need government. Businesses certainly had that awakening. And public institutions are in the spotlight as they haven't been for a long time. Sometimes in civil society, we feel a bit like your eyes and your ears on the ground, and that's part of our role. But we also have a mouth, and sometimes we use that mouth and we offer some uncomfortable truths in your direction about some of the decisions you're making as government. And some of these truths have to do with the very real risk we see right now to democracy. Well, why is that? I think it won't surprise many of you to say that the pandemic is an emergency. An emergency has meant emergency powers, and emergency powers disrupt the really important checks and balances that we have in all of our governments. This can mean a variety of things, but often information and whistleblowers are the very first victims in emergency moments. And in general, emergencies intensify certain risks, such as in public procurement, as Sanjay was just talking about. But there are other risks as well. There's reduction in freedom of the press. I've got my newspaper mug here for those of us who still know what a newspaper is. We just had International Press Freedom Day. We still have risks out there every day to media, to journalists, to freedom of association, assembly. We've got greater risk of corruption. We also have risks to the ethical use of a person's data. Think of all the controversy out there around tracing apps that are being proposed right now. And there are very many allegations of corruption. Sanjay referred to some. The real risk, I think, is not just what can go wrong, but that these emergency powers, these imbalances, if you will, in oversight, and some of them are warranted right now, that they outlive the pandemic and they create a backslide. And that backslide is a backslide in democratic processes and a move away from openness, from transparency, from accountability. Now, it won't surprise anybody on this call that we had a trust crisis prior to the pandemic. And in some sense, this elevation or catapulting of government and its role is a chance for public institutions to regain trust. But it depends very much on how they approach the pandemic. If they make decisions right now based on democratic values that define open government, that emphasize transparency, a space for citizen engagement, for feedback loops. There's some research I just saw from Results for Development that show that where these approaches involving citizens with adaptation, with feedback loops, where these approaches were used in the Ebola crisis in West Africa, there were better outcomes. So again, I just say that government has a really big choice to make right now. And the choice they make now will impact where we go in the future. And as civil society, it's really our responsibility to work with our governments to address the risks of these emergency powers and to keep a focus on the open approaches that we really want to see, both in the response period, but also in the recovery. I'd say that for civil society, it's certainly the health of people, but it's also the health of democracy that we want to keep in our focus. Thanks.
Thanks, Robin. From the health of people to the health of democracy, laying out civil society as a partner and how to do that. Really, really helpful. If we can, it'd be great to pull that link to Results for Development article and pop it in the chat box. I think people would be very interested in looking and learning from Ebola and different crises. So now we're moving from civil society to governments. And a government that was hit by this pandemic on the earlier side as it's making its way across and down and around the globe. And that is Ye Young from Korea. So we're very excited to hear from you and your government. And our question to you is, you've really set this example globally on how to effectively deal with the pandemic. What are the lessons you've learned? And could you highlight some of those so we can all learn from them from an open government perspective? So thank you, and over to you.
Good to see you all. Nice to meet you. In order to understand what is going on in Korea in terms of COVID-19, you need to know what is happening in Korea.
So since the outbreak, we have been establishing system and responding. And so far, we had 8,000 confirmed cases, and a lot of them are recovered. And if you look at the confirmed cases over the past 2 days, it has largely reduced. And yesterday and today, we had 0 confirmed cases in Korea. So this shows our government's success with the responding to the COVID-19. And there are 3 ways that we can explain this success. One, the prompt and systematic government system. And 2003, we experienced SARS, and 2010, we experienced MERS. So we did have some experience around this infectious disease. So with this experience, we have come up with these realistic manuals. And so we have these 4 levels of urgent levels so that we can apply different government approaches. And especially in 2015, the most important lesson that we learned was that the prompt testing was such an important factor. So the private sector, as they promptly developed the diagnostic kits, we have used such a diagnostic kit so that we can check and understand how many confirmed cases there are. So we have testing capacity of 200,000 a day and applying this. And another thing is that the isolating those confirmed cases from the public. I cannot hear the speaker. I cannot hear the speaker. So sticking. And the second is blocking the contacts. So we have this system as we prepare these negative pressure rooms for these confirmed cases. And we also wanted to make sure that we track these travel logs of the confirmed cases. And also we urge the public to wear the mask. And with these social measures, without having lockdown implemented, we could succeed in containing the COVID-19. Another new implementation is that we have made those inbound travelers, we have applied this mandatory self-quarantine for 14 days. So if they see some symptoms displayed, then they can easily communicate with the government workers, and the local government will adequately take measures. And second is the transparent sharing of the information and open communication with the public. Korea, under the law of prevention of infectious disease, we are supposed to inform all the information to the public, and even the close contacts of the confirmed cases and the travel logs as well. So of course, spotting the confirmed case is important, but also the public need to understand if they if their path have crossed with these confirmed cases. And the third is with the public and private active partnership. And one example is the development of the mask app. At early stage, we did not have enough supply of masks, and that created huge confusion. And what we do is we distribute a mask through a pharmacy network in Korea. And because of this limited supply network, there used to be a long queue, which could expose these people to disease. So with this development of app, we can let the public know how many of the masks are available at local pharmacies. So when the public buy masks, we can even minimize the possibility of the infection. And also for these vulnerable groups, to minimize the confusion, these vulnerable groups could be supplied without any inconvenience by the local governments. So I believe that these are some of the success factors of the Korean government.
Thank you very much. I think we were all hanging on every word, all the examples. There was not so much a question, but an ask in the chat around whether South Korea would be willing to co-chair a government OGP learning around this. We heard things around rapid digitization, which came up in the polling as one of the #1 things people are interested in with this app that you used. A lot on collaboration between citizens and the private sector. And very interestingly, you talked about vulnerable groups, which came up as the #1 concern from apolitical members on how to think about supporting folks, vulnerable groups and small businesses. You talked about how to support them. So I'm sure there'll be more questions in the South Korean example. So thank you very much. And thanks to the participants. Thanks to the participants for putting your takeaways on the South Korean example into the chat box so we can all learn from each other. So let's move from South Korea to New Zealand. Another example, today the news is just out that there may be a bubble of travel between New Zealand and Australia, another form of cooperation because of the situation of the number of cases being quite low and contained and moving forward. So we're going to hear from Helen Clarke on what worked in this successful strategy. What were the principles of open government? Everything from transparency, citizen engagement, public oversight, and the Unite Against COVID-19 strategy. I think even that was in the backdrop of some of the Prime Minister's press conferences. So over to you, Helen. Thank you.
Well, thanks, and hi, everybody. I think an important point to make at the outset is that the New Zealand government adopted a strategy of elimination of the virus from New Zealand. Not all governments have adopted such a strategy. Some have had an approach of saying, people are going to get it, and that they said might build immunity, which is yet to be proven, by the way. But of course, if the disease runs, the chances are that it will hugely impact on the older and most vulnerable members of our populations. And as we've seen, it has struck people down to death at all ages, from babies through to teenagers and people in the prime of their working lives. It's a very dangerous virus. The New Zealand government said, we are not going to let this spread through our population. We are going to take measures and invite you, the public, to be part of this journey to eliminate the virus here. So that requires a rather high level of trust in government. Government can't do it by decree. You try to repress people in a lockdown without their consent and buy-in, it's not going to be nice at all. So New Zealand government, led by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who is a very empathetic personality and a good communicator, invited the public to be part of this. We need your cooperation. Yes, of course, there are powers under the Health Act. There are powers under the Epidemic Preparedness Act, which was passed when I was Prime Minister. But in the end, none of that works if the public don't believe in it. But our public could see what was happening to other countries, devastated by the scenes from late January, early February from Wuhan, which was first to be stricken, and then devastated, and as we go particularly into March with what we were seeing from Italy and elsewhere. So really, to cut the long story very short, the Prime Minister around the 14th of March said, this is where we want to be. She started with signalling that we would be closing the border to all non-New Zealanders from around the 18th, 19th of March. And then the following Saturday, she came again with a public press conference, and everyone is watching these press conferences and daily press briefings for all the latest. And she said, we're going to have a level system, a bit as Korea just described. We're saying it's level 2 now, but Thursday we go to level 4. And the only thing that's going to be working in New Zealand then is essential services, by which we include our agriculture and food production, obviously, as well as health services. You can go to a hospital, you can go to the pharmacy to pick up your medicines, and you can go to the food store. You can't do anything else. You can go for a walk, you must physically distance. Now, I have to say, the public reaction was incredible because of the openness and the constant communication. You always knew what the government was thinking. And here we are, sort of close to 5.5, 6 weeks after that. And we have, like Korea, just had 2 days of 0 new cases in New Zealand. We're back to having around 75% of our economy operating. And with any luck, late next week or possibly the following week or so, we will go down another level, which will enable the economy to resume. But we're going to have to, in the way we operate, continue quite a measure of physical distancing and much more consciousness around hand washing and so on. But without the basic trust in government to be honest and transparent and take you into its confidence, we couldn't have got there. But let me make one other very important point, because it's important to open government partnership. Of course, the plenary sittings of the Parliament stopped, but what didn't stop was parliamentary oversight. There was a special epidemic oversight committee formed. It's chaired by the leader of the opposition. It has opposition and government MPs on it, and 3 or 4 days a week they are meeting by Zoom like we are. They're summoning witnesses. Everybody's got a point of view. You know, some say not fast enough, not good enough. Others say, you know, too much. But it's all out there. The media is extremely engaged. And I have to say that I think it's really been a model of how to conduct in a democracy a response to a pandemic as serious as this. I'm not saying that, you know, necessarily the government got everything right at every step, but perfection is too much, and to expect, you can't let it be the enemy of the good. But at every point there's been communication, engagement, involvement, and that I think is and the public response to that has meant we are where we are now.
Thanks, Helen. We couldn't help but watching the New Zealand example, the warmth and the citizen-centered, even children-centered response when she started talking about the Easter Bunny. I think that made international news, but it wasn't just about the Easter Bunny, it was about solidarity. I popped into the chat box a question about which other governments on this call have these ongoing government oversight committees, just to get a sense of how many are looking at them right now as it's really happening, not waiting till it's over, but while it's happening. I think it's a really good example of folks. We see that Scotland does, and there's some others. So we'll keep popping that in there. And we had a comment from Ninana from West Africa that they're tracking citizen trust throughout this. So I want to come back to you when we are through our speakers to learn how different folks are actually tracking trust. So thank you, Helen. I'm sure folks are going to have questions for you as we go. So thanks a lot. So let's move from New Zealand to a different part of the world. And please pop your takeaways from Helen's talk in the chat room. From New Zealand to Argentina to Caesar. Caesar, our question for you is: building trust in digital governance has been a shared co-chair priority from and with the government of Argentina, and Robin's been working on this as well. And it's a big focus area for the OGP and your 3-year action plan. As this pandemic spreads, governments are increasingly relying on digital platforms to deliver to citizens. We heard this from the Korean example and others, everything from masks to basic services. What are the main opportunities and challenge of digital governments in this response? You could see that it's a big thing people are interested in. So what are you learning? So over to you, Caesar.
Okay.
There you are. Hello, Caesar. We can see you, and I'm sure I think you'll be speaking in Spanish, so the translation will come. So, Caesar, welcome.
Sí. And not only in terms of other types of situations that we are dealing with right now, we have over half of the population with this type of preventive actions. So today we cannot just continue to do all of this unless we are in a digital situation. We know that the state, the government needs to start meeting the needs of the citizenship in an efficient and rapid way by using these digital tools. Maybe a couple of months ago, our goal was just going towards a fully digital government just by following this organic situation. And the thing here is that we started to speed all of our actions up because we needed to start meeting the demands by our citizens. Of course, we know that this chance is just coming with a lot of challenges in this accelerated digitization context and background that we have in this digital government implementation. we know that this is one of the key priorities that I have as the co-chair of the GCP, specifically in terms of this pandemic situation. These open government principles need to be mainstreamed in terms of public policy development to understand the pandemics and everything that we're doing. This also entails having transparent processes, and that information is published in a timely fashion so that we can get more involvement and engagement from the government to get better decisions. Thank you.
Fantastic, Cesar. Thank you very much. I'm sure people will have questions. This digitization is such at the top of people's minds. And I imagine there's questions on how folks are working with public-private partners, outside companies, startup GovTech to deliver that. So please pop your questions in the chat about that you have for Cesar, and we will come back to that. One question or comment that's been coming up is just the challenges around data at this time. In Europe, we have GDPR, which is privacy legislation. How do we know that data is being collected accurately? Where does that data go? So these are really complex questions. And it goes to that long-term, short-term piece that Robin was talking about. Helen, I'm going to pop back to you as we go back to New Zealand, and less about New Zealand, but more how we started with Robin on the role of multi-stakeholder platforms such as OGP to help in the recovery. How do you make sure that these multi-stakeholder platforms are inclusive and have transparency, including the private sector as well as citizens and government? So back to you, Helen.
I think that for every single one of our countries, we're facing a future which is different from what we've known. There will be a new normal. And the question is the extent to which we just let that take its course and miss an opportunity, or whether we see this as one of those moments where there could be transformative change. What I pick up not only from my own country, where, say, I live in the middle of a big city, Auckland, and you can hear the birds, you can hear the insects, the air is clean. I read about people in Kathmandu being able to see the mountains sometimes for the first time in their lives because the air pollution's not there, the traffic noise is gone. We're also noticing around the world the impact on the most marginalized, and so issues of social inclusion are arising that have to be dealt with. So we can go back exactly the way we were around the world with the needs of the marginalized not being met, with no care or regard for levels of air pollution, carbon footprints and the rest of it. Or we could say, hey, there could be a different sort of future here. And that building that future, I think, really does need to be co-designed with society and with key actors across the economy. So this could be a very transformative moment, and one I hope that Open Government Partnership will make the most of, for saying we need all stakeholders around the tables now as we chart the way ahead, because actually what we had wasn't often that great. We could do it better. We could be more inclusive. We could be more resilient. We could be more sustainable. But we're going to need, again, to pull on everyone's efforts to get to that point. So I think there's huge opportunities here for the societies that are bold enough to grab them, and the governments who get it, that this has revealed things about the way we were, which really need to be addressed going forward.
Thank you, Helen. I put in the hashtag Build Back Better. There's definitely conversations happening around climate and gender and inclusivity, and it's an interesting balance governments have in civil society about responding now, but responding in a way that builds to the future. So I'm gonna a few more interventions, then we'll get to some of the great conversations that are happening in the Zoom chat and a bit more questions. So I'm gonna go back to South Korea. Young, and you laid out all the different pieces that the South Korean government has been doing. I was wondering if you could drill down a bit more, describe a bit more how you think about the principles of open government as you have done that and as you are working towards recovery. What principles are really key and how do you keep those in front of you?
As personally speaking, open government principles and public-private partnership are really important. And the pandemics like COVID-19, the public-private partnership is really, really important.
So like COVID-19, I believe that the government effort alone will not do it. We have to gather all the wisdom from the private sector and the public sector, and how to garner the wisdom from the private sector. I believe the way to do that is to be transparent and to let the others know that there are areas that the private sector can also contribute. So we need to persuade the public in this way, and that way we can gather the wisdoms from the public as well. So practically, well, in Korea, as we responded COVID-19, we have seen various ideas, and half of them are actually from the private sector. And I think that those ideas are very, very useful. For example, for the first question that we shared, I talked about this mask app. And well, actually, one developer developed this app, not sleeping for 3 days in a row. So this shows the importance of the cooperation between the private sector and the public sector. And second is that this voluntary participation of the private sector. I think without this, things will be a lot difficult. For example, self-quarantine and people who display symptoms, or people who think that they might display symptoms or they might have the virus. I think without a voluntary participation, that is self-isolating, we could not succeed in containing the virus. And as the weather is getting hotter in Korea, people's voluntary participation to wear the mask even in this hot weather, I think this is indeed the effective way. So this is our approach.
Thank you. We talked about public-private partnership. Going off of what Helen was saying, there's been a lot of chat, by the way, on open government being more than about partnership, being about transparency and other pieces. So it's important to point that out. And also the dynamics between the federal government and local government. We've been hearing how does that work in times like this? So it's another topic to take a look at. We will not be able to explore every part of open government and COVID-19 in 60 minutes, but there's great fodder here for the folks at OGP and those of you in the Apolitical Network to go deeper. And we're really hoping this is going to forge some relationships. There's questions here, OGP, around, do you have standards around how to judge? Is there like impact assessment? So some great innovations and collaboration that could be happening here. So just quick final two insights from our speakers. So Robin, we started off with civil society. We just heard from Korea the importance of citizens' engagement in this. What role do you see? You talked about using the voice. What other roles do you see in civil society helping open up government during this response? And any specific examples you have?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to all the things we're all trying to do, such as survive all this remote working and wait for our physical spaces to open up so we can all be together again and talk about policy in person and talk about practice in person. I think there are 5 things I'd say that civil society can do, 5 areas we can work on. One is I'll go through them quickly. Partner is 1, 2 is oversight, 3 is institutions, 4 is expertise, and 5 is power. So the first thing is we can be as constructive as possible in partnership with government and business. We just heard about some great examples where the tripartite is needed. We need labor in there as well. We need to make sure we're looking at all society's actors. There's a big wave right now in business about stakeholder economies. We need to think the same way. We need to think about all the stakeholders in crisis, and that involves a very broad movement. Now, there's an example that my OGP, Open Government Partnership colleagues pointed out to me in Croatia, where the Ministry of the Interior and an organization called Zagreb Child and Youth Protection Center, they created an initiative to focus on domestic violence during the crisis. And that's been a huge issue. We know people are stuck at home and some really bad things are happening. This is how we can all work together. Offering oversight. During the pandemic, there's been a tremendous emphasis and focus on, potential corruption risk. We heard about the procurement issues that were raised by Sanjay early on, and the really amazing solutions that have come through in Ukraine. Ukraine, by the way, has been on the forefront of procurement reform, including citizen participation in that reform. But we need to step back and look at the whole cycle of public financial management. We need to look at tax and revenues and income and think about budgeting and think about allocation and making sure there's no conflict of interest. And we really need to push for true financial transparency as a part of this oversight role that civil society can help play. The third area is promoting institutions. I hope this is some music to the government's ears out there. It's basically, I think it's our responsibility as civil society to say that government institutions need more resources. Part of the reason we're in so many challenging situations is a lot of government institutions had been stripped back of some key functions. They weren't being resourced to produce open data, to have participatory processes with feedback loops and so on. So I think it's really important that we go back in there and we ask for the resources that we know our institutions need. And those resources are going to be scarce, so it's not going to be easy, but it's definitely about building back better. Lisa, you stole my hashtag. It's absolutely where we need to go. On expertise, civil society has got a lot of expertise. We're really into some technical issues now across the open government community. There are thousands of NGOs focused on really specific things. Use us, ask us questions, bring us into your debates, let our expertise come to bear as you build policy. And finally, what we can do as civil society, we can keep an eye on power. We can make sure that where power has grown or it's become centralized under COVID, there's a plan to get back to this new normal. I couldn't agree more with Helen Clarke that we need to go forward and bring back something quite different from what we had before. We need to go back to a place where, we need to go forward to a place where rights are protected, authority is restored to all powers where it's been taken away. We need to advocate, for example, for a society-wide discussion around data governance. Argentina is doing amazing things. What are the kinds of conversations we can lead together when we think about how data is being used and how we'll understand as citizens what surveillance means for us, what automated decision-making needs for us. Let's lead on that. Let's make sure we're ahead of those conversations. We knew we needed them. Now we absolutely need them. And finally, just to say that however we as societies manage this crisis, I know it's been said before, but the response is going to really make a difference in terms of how the recovery feels. Governments have a lot of choices to make, so does civil society, but we really need to make those choices to build back a better for everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Robin. And as you were speaking, lots of exchanging on the chat about people who may want to connect with one another on digital governance, on data integrity, on inclusion. So thanks everyone for putting contact information or whatever you want. We really want to use this as a platform. And I can't let it go without saying that when we talk about government resources, the best government resource are the public servants, those of you in government who get up every day and are working on this. So Cesar, I'm going to give you the last minute before we do a final close on any final observations on open government from the Argentinian perspective, particularly on the data, but others. So Cesar, over to you.
From the government of Argentina, I can tell you that, well, we started to just lead all of this, so we have a bigger challenge ahead of us. So first and foremost, I can tell you that we have had this key transparency that is very important to start preventing in terms of our policies. For that reason, we have a very specific section addressing COVID-19 in our official government website, where we centralize and update all of this COVID information on a daily basis. And thanks to these digital platforms such as Facebook, Google, Instagram, that's how we have been able to make all of our citizens just staying informed about all of this. Today, and more now than ever, it is more important to start just really discriminating the information, to define what information is fake and what information is real, such as the information disclosed by the Public Agency of Information of Argentina. Moreover, we have this principle of accountability as a core principle, just like with many other countries in the world. Our Ministry of Health just discloses information with all of these infections and cases. They give daily conferences. And of course, we cannot think of an open government if we do not think of inclusion. So I can tell you that across the various tools that we have, this platform that we use allows citizens to be able to get this self-evaluation, to get this type of tips, specific pieces of information and news, and the mandatory rules that they have to follow. So just to summarize this, we are centralizing our digital services, and we are inviting all of our jurisdiction to put them in place to ensure an equal access to key resources for us to be able to go through these pandemics. And also, we launched a portal for us to be able to centralize topics such as education, work, culture, entertainment, for the citizens to be able to develop these activities as part of this context. Moreover, we are doubling our efforts for us to be able to continue working jointly with the civil society. In Argentina, we're doing that through our multi-stakeholder open government table for us to be able to, discuss certain topics such as strategic definitions and some solutions that could be mainstreamed to other areas. And lastly, but not least, I would like to comment that we're also focusing our response on this principle of federalism. We just decided a couple of times ago, we decided that we needed to mainstream all of this through the local government, federal government. All of our digital services are accessible throughout the whole country in all jurisdictions. We are working with all of our Argentinians, just all of the sectors of Argentina. So in these pandemics, we are working jointly with an open government based on the principles of an open government. We need to really take advantage of OGP as a global platform for us to be able to have this open response. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cesar, for that. It was a great way to end, saying we need to take advantage of OGP around this. We don't need to recreate the wheel. We can share with one another. We can learn from one another as we've done today. You've been seeing in the Zoom chat, OGP, this is kind of an appetizer. There's much deeper ways to engage on how to learn from each other, how to put this in practice, both from a civil society and a government perspective and that partnership perspective. So we're really excited to be bringing that together. And I know Sanjay would say that open government is everyone's role inside of government, not just the open government person. So there's lots of learning here. So I want to leave the last word to you all. Please, if you could summarize in a word, either how you're feeling or your big takeaway from this call. We're just going to put it into the group chat box. Promise to everyone that we will summarize the group chat and put it, send it back out to you all with all the links that went by. Don't feel like they're going to go. We'll put that out in the chat to you so we don't lose this. Let's get those last words from you. People are inspired and hopeful, connected, ambitious, together, focused, insightful, concerned, OGP, go digital, allied, enlightened, opportunity for improvement, connected, one planet, thoughtful, Great to see everyone, and great to see such a diversity of folks caring and learning together. Sanjay, do you want to say one last thing before we sign off?
Thanks very much, Lisa, and thanks to Apolitical, and thanks for all who joined us. I just think that this pandemic is such a social calamity. It requires complementary action by all stakeholders: government, civil society, private sector. Trust can be the multiplier, and openness can be the bridge to mutual trust. So that's a closing thought. Thank you, Lisa.
Sanjay closes us with poetry. And from me to all of you, please stay safe, healthy, and let's keep collaborating. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day, morning, night, wherever you are in the world. Big wave, everyone, camera back on. We're human beings. Bye, working on this together. One last wave. Luxembourg, Korea, Latin America, all over the world. Thanks, everybody. It's some dancing up there. I love it. Love the dancing, Paul. Great dancing.
It was a pleasure.
Take care, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.